Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Those Who Give a Damn podcast. I am your host, Dr. Duvalier Malone. And today we are talking about something that directly affects thousands of students and children and family across Washington, D.C. Public education funding. D.C. has both traditional public schools and public charter schools, but there continuously to be a serious debate about whether students in those systems are funded equally. This conversation is not just about budgets and formulas and government reports. It is about what schools can provide, and it's also about making sure that we are giving educators a standing in the classroom, and most importantly, it is about whether or not every student have access to resources they need to succeed. And so joining me today is Victor Hortman. And Victor, thank you for joining Those Who Give a Damn. You are an expert in this field, and I am super excited to have you here today to talk us through this. I will be honest with you. I saw your call to action on IG, and I was like, okay, I need to get you on. I've spent a lot of time over the course of the last couple weeks and months talking to candidates who are running for office. And we just got through the Democratic primary here in DC. And so I said, what a perfect time to bring you on to have this conversation. So tell us about yourself and how did you become involved in the issue of equitable education funding?
Yeah, I don't know how far you want me to go back. I come from very humble beginnings. I was a foster kid. I spent the first 18 years of my life in the foster care system. And one of the things that I attribute a lot to my success is education. And so I made an early decision when I got to college that this was the perfect way to give back. I knew I wanted to kind of do policy work, but, to become a great policy person, I think you must kind of be in the trenches of the work. So I taught for about a decade, took my talents to Capitol Hill, and eventually being here in DC, being a DC resident, saw like a lot of education issues with the schools in my backyard, right? And so I then joined efforts of a couple nonprofits over the span of my career, really focusing on making sure that here in DC we have strong schools, simply put. And some of that work that I've done is, of course, around advocacy. I ran for office here, was an agency commissioner, establishing the first education committee east of the river, something that's still standing today. And so, yeah, that's kind of how I got started. Education has been the thing that I think has been a great catalyst to my own success. And I want to ensure that kids in the district also have a strong education so that they can live up to their full potential as well.
Absolutely. Charter school advocates have identified that a significant difference between resources are available to charter schools students and those that are for traditional students. And I had to dig into this some because as residents of the district, I don't have kids. So I was like, okay, let me walk through what does this really mean, right?
Yeah.
And so taxpayers, I started to see comments online and on thread, and people are really engaged in this. What does equitable funding in funding for DC charter schools mean in practice? What does that mean in practice, Victor?
Yeah, great question. Thanks for asking that. I think that first thing is it's important to step back and really look at the DC education ecosystem. We know that we have two types of schools, predominant public schools in the district. We have DCPS, which is our traditional sector, and we have a public charter school sector. 52% of the kids, our kids in the district, are in DCPS, 48 are in charter. So it's about a 50-50 split. One of the things this past budget cycle that we set to challenge was the mayor's proposed budget funded our charter students $2,000 less in terms of just operating, right? When we add facilities to that, that number grew to almost $10,000. And so what that meant was less resources for academics, for aftercare, enrichment programs, and of course, safe facilities. And so equitable funding and practice means that we don't have these large gaps between both of our sectors that are both public schools and are educating the same demographic or educating public school students per se. And so I would say that in practice, the money that should follow the student and not the school type they attend. And so that is what equity means in practice here for us at the Center for Strong Public Schools Action Fund.
So you're saying that the money should follow the student and not
Yes,
the school,
sector.
the sector in which. Unpack that some more for me.
Yeah, so what we see now is that we have a formula that was set up by leaders before who understood the challenges that we would face around equity. But what we see is funding outside of that formula, right? And what that could look like are for programs like early stages. We have funding for impact teacher bonuses. We have fixed operating costs. All those things are funded outside of the formula and only are accessible to schools who are in the traditional sector. And so that's what I mean by that. Everything should go to
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so that makes sense to me. The other piece that I want to talk about too is the facilities, right? So a lot of times what I'm hearing is one of the biggest issues in the conversation appear to be school facilities. So I'm hearing
yes.
that traditional public schools often operate in government-owned buildings, while the charter schools may have a lease purchase or renovations to maintain their own facilities. Can you walk us through that facility conversation that is happening, and
Yeah. So
how does those differences affect the true cost of educating a student? Is that included in that formula, the facility piece?
yeah, happy to talk about that. So, as you had mentioned, our charter schools essentially have to buy, lease, or finance their own facility, right? And in what is in law is that there's supposed to be a 3% facilities allocation that's supposed to happen increase per year for the charter sector, which did not happen this budget cycle. And so, as I had mentioned, the charter sector was already funding just in operating dollars less. So when we start talking about facilities, right,
Mhm.
there was almost about, I want to say $60 million allocated additionally outside the formula for our traditional sector leaving. And then the charter sector did not get that increase as well. And so what that essentially meant was in compiling that with already the decrease in funding for operating, our charter sector didn't have any money to maintain their buildings. I like to say that buildings are buildings. Both sectors experience the same issues. When it comes to air conditions failing, we often hear that a lot. We want sustainable energy in all of our schools as well, and so DCPS, this budget cycle had a pot of funds outside of that our charter sector did not have access to. And so that definitely plays a big part in the inequity piece when it comes to both sectors.
Absolutely. I want to shift gears really quickly to the human impact in this conversation. What does unequal funding look like in an actual school?
Yeah, great question. So we know that less funding means fewer opportunities for students, essentially, right? You know, from a sector that has, again, educating almost the same amount of students and have the same expectations, but are set to do so with fewer funds, right? And so, I also will add that our charter sector educates a higher proportion of Black students, right? And so for me, this is becoming a civil rights issue kind of to say it. And so our opinion here at the Center for Strong Public Schools Action Fund is that every student deserves the same opportunity, regardless of what school they attend. And so we are constantly in the fight to make sure that we are closing the gap per se, which is the campaign we ran to kind of fix this.
Absolutely. Let me ask you this. When we think about this, sometimes we don't really connect the educators and the communities in this conversation, right? We talk about the funding, we talk about the students, but how does the funding issues affect the teachers and school employees, right? So if these formulas are being calculated in a way, or are they having to cut staff? Like, how does these actually affect teachers and employees? Does it affect teachers' pay? How does it impact the educators and the school employees?
Yeah. So if we talk about operating, right, like the charters use a great deal of their funds to support teachers, right? And so if a school is getting $2,000 less per student, they aren't able to, one, attract the top talent to come into their building to teach schools. They might also have to cut an educator because the funding isn't there, or be creative or actually stretch the funding that they have in the building. And so that essentially is how it affects teachers. Also, we talk about the facilities piece, right? Like if I'm a parent and a school's having issues with their facilities, I'm less likely to send my kid there, right? If that is the narrative about that school, that AC is always out, or, it needs a modernization of some sort. I'm likely to choose a different school. And so that's actually, in my opinion, about how this all trickles down to teachers, parents, and families.
Absolutely. I want to go over to policy solutions just for a minute. What specific policy changes should the mayor, the DC council, and other educated leaders really consider in this conversation?
Yeah. What I will say is to simply put, we have the funding formula for a reason. It's one of the most equitable formulas used across the country. You can ask many experts that will say that work in the education space. And so my push would be for our elected leaders to make sure that every dollar for education flows through the funding formula. That's what it's designed for. Let's keep the formula intact. So essentially stop creating separate funding streams. Let's continue to increase our charter school facilities allowance by that 3.1% as it's supposed to be. And let's just keep the focus on students and not sectors. I am becoming more and more frustrated as we start to pit sectors together. They're both here to educate our kids. As I mentioned to, the number of students they also educate. And this is not a zero sum game. A lot of people operate under the mentality that a dollar for charter is taking away from a DCPS students, and that's not the case. The funding formula solves for that. And so, again, at the Center for Strong Public Schools Action Fund, we believe every student, Black or Brown, and particularly our low income students, should attend a high quality public school. And the only way that we're ever going to be able to do that is if we keep every dollar going through the funding formula.
Absolutely. We know that change doesn't always come from the inside. Many times come from the outside. You know that as a former elected official, and that's one of the reasons why we have you here on the podcast today. I want you to speak to parents and community leaders and ANC commissioners and people who are closest to the people in our community. How can they really work with you to be able to initiate change? What are some things that the communities can do to ensure that charter schools receive this funding according to the formula?
Yes. So what I would love to see is, as I said, I'm a former ANC commissioner, and education really doesn't come up a lot. We talk a lot about public safety, we talk a lot about transportation, but I think that education should remain a topic. And so if your ANC does not have an education committee, start one. Make sure that education comes up as a topic at every ANC meeting. We know our kids are our future. We know that these will be our next doctors, lawyers, plumbers, electrician. And so let's make sure that we are bringing education up and ensuring that our schools have what they need, right? So if you partner with the school, join a LSAT, speak to principals if you are an elected leadership or an ANC commissioner to get started. Another thing is show up and testify at at our state board meetings, at our council hearings. Of course, we have those year round. And so we are encouraging everybody to show up, take our pledge. We have a pledge up where we're asking people to sign on to fight the funding inequities. And so we ask people to visit our website, strongschoolsaction.org, excuse me, to take the pledge. Advocacy campaigns really, really, really do work. Our leaders do listen. As I said before, like we were able to put up a great campaign, which forced, I won't say forced, but brought awareness to the issue, and council ended up moving around $33 million back into the funding formula to kind of offset some of this inequity. And though that was only done by ANC commissioners passing resolutions at their meetings. We had charter parents, of course, who were loud and proud. We had DCPS people saying, I have one child that's in a DCPS school and another one in a charter, and I want them to have the same opportunity. And so I encourage just to be active. Like we know that the political ecosystem is changing a lot. And so now is the time to engage. And I wouldn't do it later. I would start now. And so for those who want to be involved, feel free to reach out to me, Victor at strongschoolsaction.org. Happy to figure out a way to plug you in so you can advocate for schools in your neighborhood and your ward.
Absolutely, and we'll share that information in our Substack and on the podcast and
Yeah.
on the website so people can connect to you, Victor. You're exactly right. One of the things that I experienced when I was on ANC as a commissioner and just working in community is that people want to be engaged, but we have to motivate them to get engaged. And when I first started this journey, a lot of the community meetings were small, nobody was showing up. But over time, with visibility, people did start to show up and get excited and get involved in community. And I do agree with you that political leaders do listen. We just have to show up and be visible and making sure that they hear our voices. Which leads to my next question here. If every DC council member was watching this podcast today, which many of them do, most of them follow me or I've interviewed them, what would you say directly to them today, to the DC council?
Yeah. Again, I think my major push today is that, like, again, let's use the funding formula for what it's for. It is one of the most equitable funding formulas in the nation per se, and that's a big shout out to former council members and mayors who were a big part of making that happen. I'll also say, like, again, the kids are our future. We talk about our youth and what's happening, what the narrative is about the youth in our city. But when we think about it, kids are spend 18 years of their life in our school systems, right? And so we don't have the funding to kind of support them, to give them a path to be successful because we aren't funding our schools successfully. That's kind of on us, right? And so I would encourage every council member to really look at the schools in their ward, figure out what they need, and let's work together to fund our schools equitably to make sure that every student is on a path to success and can grow and live and thrive here in the district.
Awesome. Victor, thank you so much again for joining Those Who Give a Damn podcast. This has been great, and this is one of many conversations that I believe that we have to have as a community as we move forward in making sure that DC students are educated, and they're not educated by what ward they live in, but they're educated in this equitable way that makes sense to all of us. And so I appreciate you shedding light on this topic. And before we let you go, once again, I want you to share your information with my audience of how they can get involved and get activated in this movement.
Yeah, sure. So I would encourage everybody to visit strongschoolsaction.org. Also, feel free to reach out to me if you want to know more. We do also have two, what I would say, programming that we put on throughout the year. One is a policy institute. So if you are interested in knowing more about education policy, we have our policy institute where we allow you to pick an issue. It's 7 sessions and build upon it so you can design your own policy that you can advocate for what you want to see. Maybe it is equitable funding, whether maybe it's AI is a big topic, maybe some around AI. Come work with me and experts across the city on how we can push this forward. And if you have electoral aspirations, you want to be an ANC, maybe you want to be the next council member, we also have our Strong Start Campaign Institute. Our application will be opening up on uh, on Monday, actually, July 24th. So you can visit there, where we are giving you the tools and the skills to actually run for office and actually bring to life great policy around education, again, to move our students forward.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Victor, for joining us on Those Who Give a Damn podcast. And I believe this conversation is going to be insightful and it's going to really help people who want to get a seat at the table be informed of how to have that pathway. Because a lot of people want to get involved in community, but they don't understand and know the pathway. So thank you for shedding a light on a path that people can get involved on a such timely and needed conversation here in the District of Columbia. Thank you again for joining me. I
Thank
truly,
you.
truly appreciate it.